The desert night swallowed everything beyond the cone of her headlights. Rebecca Coleman kept her eyes on the white lines cutting through the darkness of Interstate 40, the 18 wheels of her Kenworth humming their familiar song against asphalt. The radio played low, Waylon Jennings asking if Hank had really done it that way, and she reached for the flask tucked beside her seat with fingers that trembled just enough to notice. Whiskey burned going down. She welcomed it. The nightmare had come again 3 hours ago when she'd pulled off at a rest stop outside Gallup, folded her 240-pound frame into the sleeper cab, and closed her eyes for what was supposed to be a quick nap. But sleep never came easy anymore. Instead, she was back on that mountainside in Helmand Province, the weight of the M110 rifle familiar against her shoulder, Michael Torres breathing beside her in the darkness, his voice soft as he talked about the ranch they'd buy in Montana when they got home. Then the explosion, the screams over the radio, 12 Navy SEALs pinned down in the valley below, tracers cutting through the night like angry fireflies. And Michael, her spotter, her lover, the man whose ring sat hidden in his pack, lying 20 meters down the slope with shrapnel through his gut, calling her name. She'd made her choice in 3 seconds, 47 rounds in 6 minutes, 9 confirmed kills at distances that would make the devil himself respect the shooter. 12 SEALs walked out of that valley. Michael Torres bled out before she could reach him, his blood warm and sticky on her hands, his last breath rattling in his chest while she held him and lied that he was going to be fine. That was 11 years ago, felt like yesterday. Rebecca shook her head, forced the images back into the dark corners where they lived, and checked her mirrors. The painted desert truck stop glowed on the horizon like a small constellation, its lights promising coffee and a moment to stretch legs that hadn't moved in 5 hours. She signaled right, felt the familiar weight shift of 40,000 pounds of cargo as she guided the rig toward the exit. The parking lot sprawled half empty under sodium lights that turned everything the color of old photographs. 4 other trucks sat scattered across the asphalt like sleeping giants. She backed into a spot with the practiced precision of 14 years behind the wheel, set the air brakes with a hiss that sounded like a tired sigh, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. Her reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, 44 years old. Gray streaking through brown hair, she kept cut short because vanity was a luxury she'd surrendered somewhere between Kandahar and here. The scar on her neck, pale against tan skin, where shrapnel had missed her carotid by 2 inches. Eyes that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. Chief Warrant Officer 3. Rebecca Coleman, United States Army, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers. The unit that didn't exist in polite conversation, that supported missions the government would never acknowledge, that put her in positions where a single bullet at impossible distances could save lives or end them. That woman was dead, had been for 11 years. Now she was just Becca, a truck driver, invisible, safe. She climbed down from the cab, her boots hitting the pavement with a solid thunk, and headed toward the diner attached to the truck stop. The night air carried the smell of sage and diesel, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. Arizona in October, when the desert finally exhaled the summer's heat and remembered how to be beautiful. The diner was pure Southwest kitsch, all turquoise vinyl and Navajo prints, with a counter that had seen 1,000 truckers and a jukebox that still played actual records. Behind the counter, Dolores Martinez looked up from wiping down the coffee station and broke into a smile that crinkled the corners of her 65-year-old eyes. Dolores had been Army too, back in Vietnam, a nurse who'd held dying boys and told them lies about going home. She recognized ghosts when she saw them. Never pushed, never judged, just poured coffee and listened when listening was needed. "Usual spots open, mija," Dolores said, already reaching for the pot of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Rebecca slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, the one that let her see both doors and keep her back to solid wall. Old habits. She ordered the burger and fries she wouldn't finish, and the coffee she'd drink until her hands stopped shaking. "You're looking thin," Dolores said quietly, setting down the mug. "I'm fine. You said that last month, and the month before." Dolores's voice carried the gentle firmness of someone who'd pulled too many people back from edges they didn't know they were standing on. "When's the last time you slept through the night?" Rebecca wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. "When's the last time you did?" Dolores smiled sadly. They understood each other, she and this woman who'd never asked about the scars or the way Rebecca sometimes flinched at sudden noises. Some wars you brought home, some wars you never left. The rumble of motorcycles shattered the quiet like thunder rolling across the desert. Rebecca's head came up, every nerve suddenly awake, cataloging threats the way she'd been trained. A dozen bikes, maybe more, their engines a coordinated growl as they pulled into the parking lot. Through the window, she watched them dismount, leather and denim, and the hard-weathered faces of men who'd seen their share of bad days. The leader was impossible to miss, 6'4" of muscle and attitude, a scar cutting diagonal across his face from forehead to cheek, tattoos running down both arms and sleeves of ink and memory. They came through the door in a pack, loud in the way men get when they're trying to fill space with noise. The leader dropped onto a stool 4 down from Rebecca, slapped the counter hard enough to make the sugar dispenser jump, and called for beer. "Don't serve alcohol, honey," Dolores said, her voice flat. "Coffee, soda, or water." The big man grinned, all teeth and no warmth. "Coffee it is then. Black, strong, like I like my women." His companions laughed too loud. Rebecca kept her eyes on her plate, reading them the way she'd learned to read terrain. Motorcycle club patches on their backs, but these weren't weekend warriors playing outlaw. These were real. Veterans, most of them, from the way they carried themselves. The small details told stories, the deliberate spacing that gave each man room to move, the way their eyes swept the diner on entry, the posture that never fully relaxed. Dangerous men who'd earned their danger honestly. The leader's voice carried down the counter, pitched to perform. "So we're running up through Kunar province, right? 4th deployment, and I'm thinking this is finally the mission that gets me home in a box. Taliban had us pinned down, and our CO wants to pull back, leave 4 guys trapped in this compound." Rebecca's burger turned to sawdust in her mouth. "But I'm not leaving my brothers, you feel me? So I tell the captain, respectfully, that he can write me up when we get back. But right now I'm going in. Took 6 guys with me, lost 2. His voice dropped, heavy with manufactured grief. PFC Jason Miller, Sergeant Luis Ramirez. I still see their faces, man. Every damn day." One of the younger bikers, baby-faced and trying too hard, chimed in. "That's when they court-martialed you, right, boss, for saving those guys? Dishonorable discharge." The leader's voice carried pride wrapped in bitterness. "Because I chose brothers over orders. Because I believed in something bigger than career advancement. The Army doesn't like that. They want sheep. I was a wolf." He went on, weaving a story of heroism and betrayal, of a system that punished the righteous and promoted the cowards. It was a good story, tight narrative, clear heroes and villains, the kind of story that played well over beers with people who wanted simple truths in a complicated world. It was also, Rebecca noted, carefully edited. The parts about why the court-martial happened, about what specific orders were disobeyed, about the actual sequence of events in that compound, all of it smoothed over with the vague language of someone who'd told this version so many times he might actually believe it himself. Then he said the name, casual, throwaway, part of the narrative scenery. "Had this buddy, Danny Chen, good Marine, best damn spotter I ever worked with. He was with me in Helmand when things went sideways." Rebecca's hand stopped halfway to her coffee cup. Danny Chen, Corporal Danny Chen, United States Marine Corps, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. 22 years old when an IED sent shrapnel through his chest on a road outside Ramadi. Not Helmand. Ramadi. Iraq, not Afghanistan. And he'd been her spotter in her unit, not this man's buddy anywhere. She'd held Danny while he died, his blood soaking through her uniform. His last words asking if his mom would be proud of him. She'd carried his gear back to base because someone had to, and she couldn't leave any part of him behind. She'd stood at attention while they loaded his body onto the transport home, and she'd never spoken his name out loud since because some griefs were too heavy for words. And now this stranger was using Danny Chen's death as a prop in his personal mythology. Getting the details wrong, stealing valor from a kid who'd never had the chance to tell his own story. Something cold and sharp settled in Rebecca's chest. The leader noticed her then, his eyes tracking down the counter to where she sat, and she watched his expression shift through the calculations men like him always made when they saw women like her. Big woman. Bigger than the wives and girlfriends who fit comfortable in the passenger seats of their bikes. The math was instant and cruel. "Hey now," he said, voice loud enough to carry. Lady truckers out here making runs. That's something. Though I gotta say, looks like somebody's been eating good on the road. They raise the weight limits on trucks these days. The diner went quiet. That particular silence that happens when everyone knows something ugly is starting and nobody wants to be the one to stop it. Rebecca set down her fork with the careful precision of someone controlling their hands very deliberately. She'd been fat all her life, heard every variation of every joke, from playground bullies who pushed her down and called her whale, from drill sergeants during basic who tried to use shame as motivation until they realized she could outshoot every man in her unit, from men who thought a woman's worth was measured in pounds and inches and their approval. She'd learned to let it slide off, water on stone. Erosion was slow, but stone always won. But he'd used Danny Chen's name, made him a character in a lie. That changed things. One of the younger bikers, emboldened by his leader's attention, added his voice. Maybe she's hauling food for herself, not for delivery. The laughter was uglier this time, sharper. Rebecca stood, left a $20 bill on the counter, enough to cover her meal and Dolores's trouble. Headed for the door without a word because engaging was a choice and she'd made a career out of choosing her battles carefully. The big man moved to block her path, not touching, but close enough, in her space, making a point. Hey now, don't be sensitive, we're just having fun. You military folks should have thick skin, right? He looked her up and down, theatrical. Oh wait, maybe not military, they got standards. Rebecca stopped, turned her head to look at him fully for the first time. He stood 9 inches taller than her 5'7", outweighed her by maybe 40 pounds of muscle to her soft bulk, had the reach and the strength and the confidence of someone who'd won every physical confrontation he had ever started. None of that mattered at all. You done? Her voice was quiet, flat, the tone she'd used to give orders to men who'd learned that quiet voices from her meant someone was about to die. Yeah, I'm done. You can go back to your truck now, ma'am. She stepped close enough to smell the coffee on his breath and the leather oil on his jacket, close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes and she had to look up to meet his. The diner had gone silent again, but this silence felt different, anticipatory. Fort Benning, 2003, Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, Class 0314. I placed second in a class of 47 men. First place was a SEAL who died in Ramadi 6 months later. Her voice never rose above conversational, never took on heat or anger, just delivered facts like rounds downrange. The longest confirmed kill I ever made was 1,340 yards. Kandahar, 2011. Crosswind 18 miles per hour, temperature 104 degrees, target moving. One shot, headshot, 16 people walked away from that valley because of that shot. She watched his eyes track to the faded tattoo on her wrist, mostly hidden by her sleeve. The distinctive Reaper patch of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, the unit that didn't officially exist. Danny Chen died in Ramadi, not Helmand, Iraq, not Afghanistan, and he died in my arms, not yours. She took one more step, closing the distance until they were inches apart. He was 22 years old and the best damn spotter the Marines ever produced, and you're using his memory to make yourself look like something you're not. The color drained from the big man's face. Around them, the other bikers had gone still. The casual violence of moments before replaced by something else. Recognition, calculation, fear. Now, if you want to continue insulting me, that's your choice. But know this first. She pitched her voice lower, intimate, the way she'd talk to a target through a scope in the seconds before the trigger pull. I've killed 47 people at distances where they never saw me coming. Never knew I existed until they were already dead. You're standing 6 feet away. You think hard about whether you really want to find out what I can do at this range. She held his eyes for 3 more seconds, watching the mathematics play out behind them, then stepped around him and walked out of the diner. Her heart was hammering. Her hands were shaking. The PTSD was clawing at the edges of her control, trying to drag her back to Helmand, to Ramadi, to all the places where distance and precision were the difference between living and dying. But she made it to her truck, climbed into the Kiyum, locked the door, and sat in the darkness, breathing deep and slow, counting each exhale like she'd been taught in the VA therapy sessions she'd attended twice before deciding pills were easier than talking. Through the diner window, she could see them inside. The big man standing frozen where she'd left him. His crew gathered around him, talking fast, gesturing. One of them, older than the others with the careful movements of someone carrying old injuries, pulled out his phone and started typing. Rebecca closed her eyes. She'd made a mistake, revealed herself, drawn attention. Everything she'd spent 11 years avoiding, blown to hell in 30 seconds because a stranger had stolen a dead man's name. Michael would have laughed. He'd always said her protective instincts were going to get her killed someday. Turned out he was wrong about that. It was his death that had killed her instead, just slower. She was reaching for the ignition when she heard the knock on her door, 3 sharp raps against the metal. She looked down to find the older biker, the one who'd been typing on his phone, standing beside her truck. He held up both hands, empty, universal sign of peaceful intent. Against her better judgment, she cracked the window 2 inches. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus Hayes. Doc, they call me. I was Army Special Forces medic, 18th Delta, before medical discharge in 2014. His voice was respectful, careful. "I need to tell you something about Victor Donovan, the man you just faced down in there. Not interested. He's not what you think. I mean, he is. He's an ass, but he's not lying about the basics. He really did save 2 Rangers in Kannar Province, 2013. Really did get court-martialed for insubordination. Really did receive a dishonorable discharge." Doc paused. He left out the part where the officer who ordered the retreat was the son of a 3-star general, and the part where the court-martial was rigged from the start, and the part where he spent 10 years being treated like a criminal for doing the right thing. Rebecca kept her hand on the ignition key. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm one of the 2 he saved. I was bleeding out from a gut shot when Victor Donovan carried me 800 meters under fire. I'm alive because he disobeyed orders." Doc's voice roughened. "I tried to testify on his behalf. They wouldn't let me. Sealed the records. Made it all disappear. Victor lost everything. His rank, his pension, his wife. His kid won't even talk to him. Still not my problem." "No, ma'am, it's not. But I recognized your unit tattoo, 1/60th SOAR, and I made a phone call just now to a friend who's still in, who has access to personnel records that most people don't. He confirmed what I suspected." Doc looked up at her through the gap in the window. "Chief Warrant Officer 3, Rebecca Coleman, Navy Cross recipient, 2 Silver Stars, 47 confirmed kills over 3 deployments. You're not just any sniper, ma'am. You're a ghost. The kind of operator we heard whispers about but never met. That person doesn't exist anymore. With respect, ma'am, I think she just did. Inside that diner, standing up for a dead Marine who couldn't stand up for himself." Doc stepped back from the truck. "Victor's an idiot for insulting you. But he's also a man who's been drowning for 10 years, trying to find solid ground. Sometimes drowning men lash out at anyone who looks strong enough to save them." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with the desert night and her thoughts. Rebecca sat in the darkness and thought about choices. The choice she'd made on that mountainside. The choice she'd made in the diner. The choice she was about to make now. She could start the engine, drive away. Be in Santa Fe by morning, back to the small apartment and the silence and the careful routine that kept the ghosts at bay. Safe, invisible, dead inside but breathing. Or she could stay, face whatever was coming, risk everything she'd built in her careful, quiet, small life. The nightmares were going to come regardless. The guilt wasn't geography dependent, and Michael was still dead no matter how many miles she drove. But Danny Chen deserved better than to be a prop in someone else's story. And if this Victor Donovan really had been court-martialed for doing the right thing, really had spent a decade being punished for courage, then maybe there was something here worth staying for. Not redemption. She was too far gone for that. But maybe, possibly, the chance to do one thing right in a world that felt like it had been built from wrongs. She took her hand off the ignition key. Through the diner window, she watched Victor Donovan standing at the counter, his crew gathered around him. He was talking, gesturing, his face cycling through emotions she recognized from her own mirror. Anger, confusion, fear poorly hidden behind bravado. The look of a man who just realized he'd picked a fight with something he didn't understand and wasn't sure how to back down without losing the only thing he had left. His pride, his story, his version of himself. Rebecca knew that look, lived that look, had been that person standing in the wreckage of who she used to be, trying desperately to build something from the rubble that felt real enough to inhabit. The difference was she'd had the luxury of disappearing. No one looked for Chief Warrant Officer Coleman because her missions were classified and her unit didn't officially exist. She could become Becca, the truck driver, and let Rebecca, the sniper, fade into the shadows of redacted files and sealed records. Victor Donovan had no such luxury. His discharge was public record. His humiliation was permanent. His story had been written by people who'd made him the villain, and all he could do was tell his own version to anyone who'd listen and hope it made him feel like something other than a failure. She understood that too, the desperate need to matter, to be seen, to have your sacrifice acknowledged instead of erased. The door to the diner opened and Victor came out, Doc beside him. They walked across the parking lot toward her truck, moving slow, hands visible, body language careful, non-threatening. Rebecca didn't reach for the pistol she kept in the glove box, didn't start the engine, just waited. Victor stopped 10 feet from her door, close enough to talk, but far enough to respect space. In the sodium lights, his face looked older than it probably was, carved deep with lines that came from carrying weight that never got lighter. "I owe you an apology," he said. No preamble, no excuses. What I said in there was wrong. How I said it was worse. And using your friend's name, someone you actually knew, someone who actually died, that was disrespectful to his memory and to you. Rebecca said nothing. Let him stand there in the silence and the weight of his words. Doc told me who you are, what you did, what you sacrificed. Victor looked down at his boots, then back up. I spent 10 years telling stories that make me sound like something I'm not. A hero, someone who mattered. When the truth is, I saved 2 people and lost in everything, and I don't know if that math works out to anything meaningful or if I'm just a cautionary tale about keeping your mouth shut and following orders. You did the right thing, Rebecca said quietly. So did you. On that mountain, choosing the mission over the man you loved. Victor's voice was rough. Doc found that story too, the Navy Cross citation. It's all redacted to hell, but he knew someone who was there. They say you made an impossible shot, and then another, and another, saved 12 SEALs while the man you were going to marry bled out 20 meters away. The words hit like rounds center mass. Rebecca's breathing stuttered. I did what I was trained to do, she managed. Yeah, so did I. Victor gestured at himself, at Doc, at the bikes parked in formation behind them. Difference is you had the sense to disappear after, become someone else. I couldn't let it go. Couldn't stop telling the story, trying to make it mean something. Make me mean something. Why are you telling me this? Victor was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a different quality. Honesty stripped of performance. Because I think you are the first person in 10 years who actually understands what it costs to do the right thing when the right thing destroys you. What it feels like to be invisible for all the wrong reasons. Behind him, the rest of the Iron Brotherhood stood by their bikes, watching. Rebecca could see them now for what they were. Not outlaws, not weekend warriors, but men who'd served and been broken by the serving, who'd been labeled and discarded, who'd found each other in the margins where the grateful nation's gratitude ran out. The Brotherhood of the Forgotten. She knew that brotherhood, had been avoiding it for 11 years because joining meant admitting she was one of them. There's a motel 5 miles up the road, Victor said. We're staying there tonight, heading north tomorrow. If you're still here in the morning and you want to talk, we'll be at the diner for breakfast around 7. He paused. If not, you'll never see us again. Either way, I meant what I said. I'm sorry. He turned and walked back to his bike, Doc following. The engines rumbled to life in sequence, a mechanical thunder that rolled across the parking lot. Rebecca watched them ride out, their taillights shrinking to red points in the darkness, until they disappeared entirely and she was alone again. She sat in the cab of her truck as the night deepened around her, thinking about choices and consequences in the weight of carrying ghosts. Her phone sat on the dash, dark and silent. She could call Dolores, ask for advice. Could call Pastor Jim back in Santa Fe, the chaplain who'd served in Iraq and understood the particular silence of trauma. Could call the VA crisis line and tell the stranger on the other end that she was having intrusive thoughts about a dead lover and a man she just met in a decision that felt too big to make alone. Instead, she picked up the flask of whiskey and took a long pull, feeling the burns settle into her chest where the cold, sharp thing had been living for 11 years. The stars were brilliant over the desert, undimmed by city lights, the Milky Way, a river of light flowing overhead. Michael had loved the stars, used to point out constellations while they lay on their backs between missions. Her head on his shoulder, his voice soft as he told her the stories the ancient Greeks had written across the heavens. He'd wanted her to live after he was gone, made her promise in the helicopter on the way to that last mission. If something happens to me, Beck, promise you won't stop living. Promise you'll find something worth fighting for. She'd promised, and then she'd spent 11 years running from that promise, hiding from it, burying it under miles and whiskey and the careful architecture of a small, controlled life. But Danny Chen deserved better than being a stolen name, and Victor Donovan deserved better than drowning alone. And maybe, possibly, she deserved better than this slow suicide by isolation. Rebecca Coleman, Chief Warrant Officer, 3 United States Army, Night Stalker sniper, keeper of ghosts, and carrier of 47 kills in one terrible choice, made a decision. She would be at that diner at 7 in the morning, not because she was ready to stop running, not because she'd forgiven herself or found peace or any of the things the therapy worksheets promised, but because Michael had asked her to fight for something worth fighting for. And standing up for the forgotten felt like it might be worth the risk. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust and distance. Somewhere a coyote sang. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, and Rebecca sat in her truck, holding a dead man's promise and a living man's apology, and chose not to start the engine. Not yet. There would be time enough for running later. For now, she would stay. Dawn came to the desert the way it always did, sudden and absolute, the sun breaking over the eastern horizon like a promise the world had no intention of keeping. Rebecca had not slept. She'd sat in the cab of her truck watching the stars fade to gray, then gray to gold, nursing the flask until it ran dry, and her hands finally stopped shaking. At 6:30, she climbed down from the crane, her joints protesting the night spent in a seated position, and walked across the parking lot toward the diner. The air was cool and still, that brief window between desert night and desert furnace, when the temperature felt almost kind. Her boots crunched on gravel and her shadow stretched long behind her, and she felt the weight of the decision she'd made pressing down on her shoulders like a rucksack full of stones. The diner was nearly empty. Dolores stood behind the counter, already pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug before Rebecca even sat down. The older woman's eyes held questions, but her mouth stayed quiet, and Rebecca was grateful for the silence. She drank the coffee black and bitter, feeling it burn away some of the whiskey fog, and tried to remember the last time she'd willingly walked toward trouble instead of away from it. 11 years, Helmand Province, the mission that had killed Michael and broken her. At 7:03, the rumble of motorcycles announced the arrival of the Iron Brotherhood. Rebecca watched through the window as they parked in a neat line, military precise, and dismounted with the coordinated efficiency of men who'd learned to move as a unit. Victor Donovan led them across the parking lot, his stride less cocky in the morning light, more measured, careful. They came through the door, and the energy in the diner shifted. Dolores stiffened behind the counter. The 2 other customers, early morning truckers nursing hangovers and coffee, looked up and then quickly away. But Victor raised one hand, palm out, and his voice when he spoke was quiet. "Ma'am, we'll take a booth in the back. Keep to ourselves. Won't be any trouble." Dolores looked at Rebecca. Rebecca nodded once. Dolores jerked her chin toward the far corner booth, and Victor led his crew there, 12 men folding themselves into seats, speaking in low voices that didn't carry. Doc Hayes broke away from the group and approached the counter, settling onto the stool 2 down from Rebecca, leaving space but making himself available. He ordered coffee and eggs and didn't speak until Dolores had moved away to the kitchen. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "Neither did I. But you're here." Rebecca turned her mug in slow circles on the counter, watching the liquid catch the light. Danny Chen was 22 years old. His mother was a school teacher in Sacramento. He sent her half his pay every month. He wanted to be a teacher too after his service. Wanted to work with kids who came from nothing, like he did, and show them there was a way out. Doc listened without interrupting. He died asking me if his mother would be proud of him, if he'd done enough, if he mattered. Rebecca's voice was flat, reporting facts, because if she let emotion into it, she'd break. "I told him yes. I told him he was a hero. I lied because dying boys need to hear lies sometimes. That wasn't a lie, wasn't it? He died in a war that accomplished nothing, for reasons nobody can explain, and 12 years later, nobody remembers his name except his mother and me. And now Victor Donovan, who never met him, using him as set dressing in a story about himself. She looked at Doc directly for the first time. You tell me if that boy mattered. You tell me if any of us mattered. Doc was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd asked himself the same questions. I was in Fallujah in '04, second battle, house-to-house fighting, the kind of close-quarters hell that turns boys into ghosts. I was a medic, special forces qualified, but my job was to keep people alive, not kill them. He paused, wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. There was this kid, 18 years old, from Iowa, farm boy. He'd been in country maybe 6 weeks, took shrapnel from an IED, tore up his insides. I worked on him for 40 minutes, did everything right, everything by the book. He died anyway, calling for his mother, and I couldn't do a damn thing but hold his hand and tell him lies about how he was going to be fine. Rebecca understood where this was going, but let him finish. I got PTSD from that, from the ones I couldn't save. Medical discharge in 14 after I tried to eat my gun in a motel room outside Fort Bragg. Victor Donovan found me, pulled the barrel out of my mouth, and sat with me for 3 days straight, making sure I didn't try again. Doc looked at her. So when you ask if any of us mattered, I can tell you Victor matters to me, flawed as he is, broken as he is. He's the reason I'm still here. He still shouldn't use Danny's name. No, he shouldn't. And he knows that now. You made sure of it. Doc's lips twitched towards something that might have been a smile. Victor spent 10 years trying to be someone people respect. He went about it wrong. But the core of what he's saying is true. He did save 2 people. He did get court-martialed for doing the right thing, and he has been punished for a decade by a system that protects officers who abandon their men. Rebecca drank her coffee and said nothing. The officer who gave the order to retreat was Captain Bradley Hoffman. His father was Lieutenant General Richard Hoffman, 3 stars, enough weight to bury inconvenient truths. The court-martial was sealed. Victor's testimony was dismissed. The 2 Rangers he saved, me and a kid named Tommy Martinez, we weren't allowed to testify on his behalf. Doc's voice went hard. Hoffman got promoted, made major within 2 years. Now he's a lieutenant colonel at Fort Bliss, 250 miles from here, living his best life while Victor scrapes by, doing odd jobs and trying to convince strangers in diners that he's worth a damn. Why are you telling me this? Because you have that kind of clearance that doesn't just disappear. Chief Warrant Officer 3, supporting classified operations. You could make calls that would get answered. You could request records that would be unsealed for you. You could be the one voice that might actually make someone listen. Rebecca laughed, bitter and sharp. I've made exactly 0 calls in 11 years. I don't exist to those people anymore. I made sure of it. Then maybe it's time to exist again. She turned to look at him fully. This man who tried to die and been saved by the same person he was now trying to save in return. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to stand up for someone who stood up for others. Same thing you did on that mountain. Same thing you've been trained to do your whole life. Doc met her eyes. I'm asking you to be who you actually are instead of who you've been pretending to be. Before Rebecca could respond, the diner door opened and Sheriff Tom Brennan walked in, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, his eyes scanning the room with the automatic assessment of someone who'd walked into enough bad situations to develop good instincts. He saw the Iron Brotherhood in the back booth, saw Rebecca at the counter, and his weathered face split into a smile that made him look 10 years younger. Chief Coleman, Chad, he said, approaching with his hand extended. Tom Brennan, Gunnery Sergeant, Force Recon, retired '09. I heard you were in the area. Sham. Rebecca shook his hand, surprised by the strength in his grip. Sheriff, heard about last night too. The whole county's talking about it. Lady trucker faces down motorcycle gang, turns out to be a decorated war hero. Tom settled onto the stool on her other side, effectively bracketing her between himself and Doc. Of course, I knew who you were the second I saw that tattoo. 1/60th SOAR doesn't recruit just anybody. You were the real deal, was the operative word. Respectfully, Chief, once a warrior, always a warrior. The uniform comes off, but the training stays in the bones. Tom ordered coffee from Dolores with a nod of thanks. I also heard about the situation with Victor Donovan, the court-martial, the sealed records. And I wanted you to know something. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through messages, and turned the screen toward her. Rebecca read quickly, her pulse picking up as she processed the information. I've got contacts at JAG, Tom said quietly. Friends from the old days who owe me favors. They can't unseal the records officially, but they can confirm certain facts. Captain Bradley Hoffman gave the order to abandon 4 Rangers. Master Sergeant Victor Donovan disobeyed that order and led a rescue team. 2 Rangers died before the rescue arrived. 2 survived because Donovan went back. The court-martial found Donovan guilty of insubordination and reckless endangerment. His sentence was dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and benefits. And Hoffman? Promoted to major within 18 months. Currently serving as battalion commander, 1st Armored Division, Fort Bliss. Tom's voice carried the kind of disgust that only fellow veterans could truly understand. The system protected him because his father had stars. The system punished Donovan because he didn't. Rebecca felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. The same feeling she used to get when a target came into view and all the variables aligned and she knew, absolutely knew, that she could make the shot. It was clarity, purpose, the thing she'd been missing for 11 years. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you have a choice to make, Tom said. You can walk away, go back to your truck and your route and your quiet life. Nobody would blame you. You've given enough, sacrificed enough. You've earned the right to peace. He paused, let the weight of that settle. Or you can stand up. Use the voice you've got, the credentials you've earned, the respect you command in circles that matter. You can be the one who finally tells the truth about what happened to Victor Donovan, about what keeps happening to good soldiers who do the right thing and get crushed by officers protecting their careers. I'm not a crusader, Rebecca said. No, you're a sniper. You identify targets and you eliminate them with precision. Tom's smile was thin and sharp. Bradley Hoffman is a target, not the kind you shoot, the kind you expose, the kind you make accountable. From the back booth, Victor's voice carried across the diner. Not loud, but clear. Tom, with respect, don't put this on her. This is my fight, my burden. I won't have anyone else carrying it. Tom turned in his seat to look at the big man. It stopped being just your fight when Hoffman used his father's influence to seal those records. When he took 2 good Rangers dying and made it about his career advancement. When he let you take the fall for his cowardice. The sheriff's voice hardened. This is about something bigger than one man's court-martial. It's about a system that needs to be held accountable. Victor stood, his full height impressive even across the distance of the diner, and walked over to the counter. Up close in daylight, Rebecca could see the details she'd missed last night. The gray threading through his dark hair, the network of small scars on his knuckles, the way he held himself with the residual posture of someone who'd spent years in uniform and never quite shook it off. I appreciate what you're trying to do, he said to Tom, then turned to Rebecca. Both of you, but I've been fighting this battle for 10 years and I've learned something important. Some fights you can't win. Some systems are too big to change. The best you can do is survive them and try not to let them completely destroy who you are. Is that what you're doing? Rebecca asked. Surviving? Victor's jaw tightened. I'm doing the best I can. By lying about Danny Chen? By stealing valor from a dead Marine to make yourself feel like you still matter? Her voice was quiet, but each word landed like a fist. That's not survival. That's slow death. I should know. I've been dying the same way for 11 years. The diner went silent. Even the cook in the back stopped moving. Dolores stood frozen by the coffee pot. I made a choice on a mountain in Afghanistan, Rebecca continued. I chose to let the man I loved die so I could save 12 men I'd never met. I made the shot, then another, 47 rounds, 9 kills. Perfect execution of my mission parameters. The SEALs walked out of that valley. Michael Torres died in the dirt while I was too far away to hold his hand. Her voice never wavered. Facts, just facts. The Navy Cross they gave me, I received it at his funeral. Stood there in my dress uniform with his mother crying 3 feet away, and they pinned a medal on my chest for letting her son die. I smiled and said thank you and went back to my quarters and put my pistol in my mouth. Didn't pull the trigger because I was too much of a coward even for that. Victor's face had gone pale, so I ran instead. Disappeared, became someone else. Spent 11 years hauling freight across the country and drinking myself to sleep and telling myself that if I just stayed quiet enough, small enough, invisible enough, maybe the ghost would leave me alone. She looked at Victor directly. How's that working for you? The staying small? The staying quiet? Does it make the ghost go away? No, Victor said, his voice rough. It doesn't. Then maybe we're done running. Rebecca stood, pulled a 20 from her wallet, left it on the counter for Dolores. I'm going to make some calls. Talk to people I haven't talked to in a decade. See if there's a way to get those records unsealed or at least get someone to look at them with fresh eyes. I can't promise anything, but I can promise I'll try. Why, Victor asked. Why would you do this for me? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. Rebecca thought about that question. Thought about Danny Chen and Michael Torres and all the other names carved into her memory like headstones. Thought about the promise she'd made to a dying man about fighting for something worth fighting for. Because the system that failed you is the same system that took the people I loved and turned their sacrifice into classified footnotes. Because every time a Bradley Hoffman gets promoted while a Victor Donovan gets destroyed, it means the cowards are winning. And I'm tired of letting cowards win. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I'm heading to Santa Fe. Home. I've got some calls to make, and I need to be in a place with decent cell reception and access to a computer. If you want to follow, follow. If you want to go your own way, go. Either way, I'll be in touch when I know something. Victor looked at his crew, at Doc, at Tom, then back at Rebecca. We'll follow. Why? Because for the first time in 10 years, someone's treating this like it matters. Like I matter. Like the truth matters. His voice cracked on the last word. Because I've got a son who thinks I'm a criminal and a failure. And if there's even a chance of proving to him that I did the right thing, I have to take it. Rebecca nodded once, sharp and military. Then let's go prove it. The ride to Santa Fe should have taken 6 hours. Rebecca made it in 5, pushing the Kenworth harder than she probably should have. The 18 wheels eating up Interstate 40 like they were hungry for destination. In her mirrors, she could see the Iron Brotherhood keeping pace, 12 motorcycles in tight formation. Victor at the point. Her phone sat on the dash, dark and accusing. She charged it at the truck stop but hadn't made any calls yet. Wasn't sure she remembered how to talk to people from her old life. Wasn't sure they'd even take her calls. But she'd made a promise to herself, to Victor, to the memory of Michael Torres and Danny Chen and all the others who died believing their sacrifice meant something. So when she pulled off at a rest stop outside Albuquerque, ostensibly to use the bathroom and stretch her legs, but really to build up the courage, she picked up the phone and scrolled through her contacts. Most of the numbers were years out of date, but there was one buried at the bottom of the list that she'd never deleted because deleting it would have been an admission she'd never intended to use it. Colonel James Mackenzie, her commanding officer at 160th SOAR, the man who'd signed off on her missions, who'd pinned the Navy Cross on her uniform, who'd stood beside her at Michael's funeral and said, if you ever need anything, you call me. She'd never called, not once in 11 years. Her finger hovered over the number. Behind her, the Iron Brotherhood had pulled in, parking their bikes in the shade. Victor climbed off his ride, stretched, but didn't approach, giving her space, respect. Rebecca took a breath and pressed call. The phone rang 3 times. She was about to hang up when a voice answered, gravelly with age but still carrying the command presence of someone born to lead. Mackenzie. Sir, this is Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Coleman. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Silence on the other end, long enough that she thought maybe he'd hung up. Then quiet and careful. Becca Coleman? Yes, sir. Jesus Christ, girl, I thought you were dead. You disappeared 11 years ago and nobody could find you. No forwarding address, no contact information, nothing. I had people looking. We all did. I needed to disappear, sir. I know, I understand. After Michael, his voice roughened. But why are you calling now? What's happened? Rebecca looked across the parking lot at Victor Donovan, standing in the sun with his crew around him, waiting to see if she could actually do what she'd promised. Sir, I need to ask you about a court-martial from 2013, 75th Rangers, Master Sergeant Victor Donovan. Another pause. That is sealed, Becca. Sealed by order of General Hoffman himself. I can't access those records. Can't or won't? Can't officially, but that's not what you're really asking, is it? She could hear the shift in his voice from formal to something more personal. You're asking if I can find someone who can, if I can call in favors, if I can make noise in the right places. Yes, sir. Why? What's Donovan to you? Rebecca considered how to answer that, settled on the truth. He's a man who did the right thing and got destroyed for it. He's a father whose son won't speak to him because the army labeled him a criminal. He's someone who's been drowning for 10 years and nobody threw him a rope. And you're throwing him one now. I'm trying to. Mackenzie was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something she hadn't heard in years. Pride. Michael would be proud of you for standing up, for fighting, for being who you've always been instead of who you've been hiding as. The words hit harder than she expected. Her throat tightened. I'll make some calls, Mackenzie said. Can't promise anything, but I know people at JAG who owe me favors. I know officers who were at Fort Benning when Hoffman was coming up, who have their own stories about his father's influence. I'll see what I can shake loose. Thank you, sir. Becca, one more thing. Where are you right now? Rest stop outside Albuquerque, heading to Santa Fe. I'm in Scottsdale. That's what, 4 hours from you? I'm coming up. Don't make any moves until I get there. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. We're going to build a case that can't be ignored, understood? Understood, sir. Good. I'll be there by 1800 hours. Send me your address. He paused. It's good to hear your voice, Chief. Welcome back to the fight. The line went dead. Rebecca stood in the desert heat, holding the phone, feeling something she hadn't felt in 11 years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, probably doomed to fail, but hope nonetheless. Victor approached slowly, reading her body language. Good news? Maybe. My old CO is coming to Santa Fe. He's going to help us build a case. She looked at him directly. But you need to understand something. This isn't going to be quick. It's not going to be easy, and it might not work at all. Courts-martial don't get overturned on good intentions. We need evidence, testimony, documentation. We need to build something airtight. How long? I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. Victor's face fell slightly, but he nodded. I can wait. I've waited 10 years. What's a few more months? Can your crew wait? Can you afford to stay in Santa Fe that long? We go where we're needed. Do what needs doing. We'll figure it out. Doc stepped up beside Victor. Chief, most of us in the Brotherhood, we've got nothing tying us down. No jobs to get back to. No families waiting. We're already living on the margins. Might as well live on the margins doing something that matters. The weight of that settled over Rebecca. These men were putting their lives on hold. Their already precarious existences at risk, based on her promise to try, based on her word that this might be worth it. She thought about Michael Torres bleeding out on a mountain while she made impossible shots. Thought about the choice she'd made then, the choice she was making now. Some shots you took because you had to, because the alternative was letting everyone down. All right, she said, then let's get to Santa Fe and start building a case that can't be ignored. They mounted up, engines and diesel power, and headed east toward the mountains. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool, turning the desert into a furnace. But Rebecca barely noticed the heat. She was too busy thinking about courts-martial and sealed records and the kind of pressure it would take to make the Army admit it had been wrong. It was a long shot, maybe impossible, but she'd made impossible shots before. She'd do it again, for Victor Donovan, for Danny Chen, for Michael Torres, for every soldier who'd ever been chewed up by a system that was supposed to protect them. The road stretched out before her, shimmering in the heat, and for the first time in 11 years, Rebecca Coleman wasn't running away from her past. She was driving straight toward a reckoning. Santa Fe spread itself across the high desert like a memory of old Spain. Adobe walls the color of sun-baked earth, mountains rising purple in the distance. Rebecca's apartment sat on the south side, a second-floor walk-up with a view of nothing much, cheap rent for cheap living. She'd been there 7 years and never hung a single picture on the walls. The Iron Brotherhood filled her parking lot like an occupying force. 12 motorcycles gleaming in the afternoon sun, 12 men standing around looking uncertain about what came next. Rebecca killed the engine of her Kenworth and sat for a moment, looking at the building that had been her hiding place, feeling the weight of bringing her past and her present into collision. Victor stood by his bike, waiting, patient, Doc beside him. The rest of the crew hung back, giving space, understanding, without being told that this was delicate ground. She climbed down from the quiet and walked to her apartment without looking back. They would follow or they wouldn't. Either way, the die was cast. Her apartment smelled like stale air and old coffee. She opened windows to let in the October breeze, then stood in the middle of her living room and saw it through the eyes of the men about to enter. Spartan, a couch bought secondhand, a table with one chair, no television, no photos, no evidence that anyone actually lived here instead of just existing between the walls. The knock came soft. She opened the door to find Victor and Doc, just the two of them. "The others are getting rooms at the motel down the street," Victor said. "Figured you didn't have space for all of us." "I don't have space for any of us." But she stepped aside and let them in. They stood awkwardly in her living room, these large men in a small space. And Rebecca wondered what the hell she was doing. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible, safe. Now she had a motorcycle gang in her parking lot and a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Her phone buzzed. Text from Colonel Mackenzie. "Arrived Albuquerque. Be there in 90 minutes, bringing materials." She showed the message to Victor. "My CO is almost here. When he arrives, you're going to tell him everything. No embellishment, no performance, just the truth. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." And Victor. She waited until he met her eyes. "This is your last chance to walk away. Once Mackenzie gets involved, once we start making official noise, there's no taking it back. Hoffman will know. His father will know. They'll come after you harder than before. You ready for that?" Victor's jaw tightened. "I've been ready for 10 years. Doc spoke up quietly. "Chief, what about you? You've spent 11 years off the grid. You go public with this, you lose that anonymity. You ready for that?" Rebecca thought about Michael Torres, about Danny Chen, about the promise she'd made in a diner to stop letting cowards win. Ready or not, it's happening. 90 minutes later, a rental sedan pulled into the parking lot. Colonel James Mackenzie unfolded himself from the driver's seat, 70 years old and still moving like a man who could lead troops into combat. His hair had gone completely white since Rebecca had last seen him, but his eyes were the same sharp gray, missing nothing. He saw her standing on the balcony, and his face did something complicated. Grief and relief and anger and joy, all fighting for dominance. Then he schooled his features back to neutral and climbed the stairs with a leather briefcase in one hand. They stood facing each other for a long moment. Then Mackenzie set down the briefcase and pulled her into a hug that smelled like Old Spice and gun oil and everything she'd been running from. "Damn it, Becca," he said into her hair. "Damn it." She let herself be held for 5 seconds, then stepped back. "Sir, this is Master Sergeant Victor Donovan and Specialist Marcus Hayes." Mackenzie shook their hands, his grip firm, assessing. "Gentlemen, let's get to work." They spread papers across Rebecca's small table. Court-martial transcripts, service records, after-action reports. Everything Mackenzie had been able to pull in the hours since her call. He'd called in more favors than she'd thought possible. Leaned on connections she hadn't known he had. "The official story," Mackenzie said, pointing to the court-martial findings, "is that Master Sergeant Donovan disobeyed a direct order during a tactical retreat, endangered his unit, and caused unnecessary casualties. He was found guilty of insubordination, reckless endangerment, and conduct unbecoming, sentenced to dishonorable discharge and forfeiture of all benefits." Victor stared at the papers like they were a snake that might strike. "The real story," Mackenzie continued, pulling out different documents, "is significantly different. According to after-action reports I obtained from sources who shall remain unnamed, Captain Bradley Hoffman ordered a retreat from a compound where 4 Rangers were pinned down by enemy fire. Donovan protested. Hoffman made the retreat order official and direct. Donovan took 6 volunteers and went back anyway. He laid out more papers, casualty reports, timeline reconstructions, radio transcripts that had somehow survived the sealing process. 2 Rangers died before Donovan's team reached them, PFC Jason Miller and Sergeant Luis Ramirez. 2 Rangers survived, Specialist Marcus Hayes here, and Corporal Tommy Martinez, who's currently serving at Fort Campbell. Doc leaned forward. "Tommy's still in? I lost track of him after I got out." "Still in. Staff Sergeant now. And according to a very quiet conversation I had with him this afternoon, very willing to testify about what actually happened that day." Mackenzie looked at Victor. "He says you saved his life. Says Hoffman was paralyzed with fear and made a call that would have gotten all 4 Rangers killed. Says you're the bravest man he's ever served with." Victor's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table. Here's the problem, Mackenzie said. All of this was sealed by General Hoffman. The court-martial was technically legal. The findings were technically accurate in the narrow sense that Donovan did disobey a direct order. To overturn it, we need to prove the order itself was unlawful, that Hoffman gave it out of cowardice or incompetence rather than tactical necessity. That's a high bar. That's a high. Can it be done? Rebecca asked. Maybe, if we can get a testimony from everyone involved, if we can get the full radio transcripts unsealed, if we can prove Hoffman's pattern of behavior. Mackenzie pulled out another file. And that's where this gets interesting. Bradley Hoffman has a history. 3 separate incidents during his career where subordinates filed complaints about his decision-making under fire. All 3 complaints were dismissed or sealed. All 3 complainants were transferred or forced out. He spread photos across the table. Young officers, enlisted men, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. General Hoffman's been protecting his son for 20 years, using his influence to bury anything that might damage Bradley's career. It's not illegal exactly. It's just profoundly corrupt. Mackenzie looked at each of them in turn. Taking this on means going after not just a lieutenant colonel, but a retired 3-star general with connections that go all the way to the Pentagon. You understand what that means. It means they'll crush us, Victor said flatly. They'll try, Mackenzie corrected. But here's what they don't know. I've been collecting pieces of this puzzle for years. Every time I heard about an officer being railroaded, every time I saw a promising career destroyed for politically inconvenient truth-telling, I paid attention. I kept notes. I made connections. He tapped the briefcase. I've been waiting for the right moment and the right people to actually do something about it. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. You've been planning this. Not this specifically, but something like it. Mackenzie's smile was thin. I'm 70 years old, retired with full pension. They can't touch me. My wife died 3 years ago. I've got no family left, no leverage they can use. And I'm tired, Becca. Tired of watching good soldiers get destroyed while cowards thrive. So yes, I've been planning, waiting. And now you've given me the opportunity I've been looking for. Victor stood abruptly, chair scraping. I won't be part of some crusade. I just want my name cleared. I just want my son to know I'm not a criminal. That's what this is, Mackenzie said calmly. But clearing your name means exposing Hoffman. And exposing Hoffman means exposing the system that protected him. You can't separate those things. The hell I can't. Victor. Doc's voice was quiet but firm. Sir, listen to what he's saying. This is bigger than you. It's about every soldier who's been thrown away because telling the truth was inconvenient. Every Marine who's been punished for doing the right thing. Every airman and sailor who's been crushed by officers protecting their careers. I don't care about every soldier. I care about my son. And what happens when Dylan grows up and joins the military? Doc stood as well, facing his friend. What happens when he's in a situation where his commanding officer makes a cowardly call and Dylan has to choose between following orders and saving lives? You want him in the same system that destroyed you? Or do you want him in a system that's been forced to change? The 2 men stood facing each other, a decade of friendship and shared trauma between them. And Rebecca saw Victor's face cycle through anger and fear and finally acceptance. I'm scared, Victor said quietly. I'm scared they'll win again. I'm scared I'll lose what little I have left. I'm scared Dylan will see me try and fail, and that'll be worse than not trying at all. Fear's not weakness, Rebecca said. Fear's just information. What you do with it is what matters. Victor turned to look at her. You're scared too. Terrified. She didn't bother lying. I've spent 11 years hiding because the alternative was facing what I'd lost, what I'd done. But hiding didn't make it hurt less. Didn't bring Michael back. Didn't give meaning to any of it. Just made me smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared entirely. She stood, walked to her window, looked out at the mountains. There's a scene in my head that plays on loop. Michael bleeding out while I'm 400 meters away with a rifle. I can see him through the scope, see him dying, and I can't go to him because if I do, 12 men die. So I make the tactical choice, the right choice, the choice that saves the most lives, and he dies alone because of it. Her voice stayed steady. Facts, just facts. I've carried that for 11 years. Tried to make it mean something by how much I suffered for it. Like if I punished myself enough, it would balance the scales, but it doesn't work that way. Suffering doesn't honor sacrifice. Action does. Standing up does. Fighting for something that matters does. She turned back to face them. So yeah, I'm scared, but I'm more scared of dying without ever trying to make his death count for something. The room was silent. Mackenzie cleared his throat. There's something else you need to know. Bradley Hoffman is currently stationed at Fort Bliss, 250 miles from here. And in 3 days, there's a ceremony at the base, a veteran appreciation event where Hoffman will be presenting awards and giving a speech about honor and sacrifice. Jesus, Doc muttered. It gets better, Mackenzie said. One of the awards being presented is a posthumous Distinguished Service Medal for Sergeant First Class Michael Torres for actions in Helmand Province, 2012. You, Chief Coleman, have been invited to accept the medal on his behalf. Rebecca's legs went weak. She sat down hard. The invitation came through official channels 2 months ago, Mackenzie continued. Sent to your Army contact address, which I still monitor. I've been sitting on it, waiting to see if you'd ever surface. Thought you should know. Why now? Rebecca's voice came out hoarse. Why present it now? Michael died 11 years ago. Because the military moves slow on these things. Because someone finally pushed the paperwork through. Because the universe has a sense of irony. Mackenzie leaned forward. Or because someone in the system still cares about doing right by the soldiers we've lost, even if it takes a decade. Victor was putting pieces together. She could see it in his face. You want her to go to this ceremony, accept the medal, and while she's there, what, confront Hoffman publicly? Not confront, expose. Mackenzie pulled out another document. If Chief Coleman is at that ceremony, she has every right to speak, to honor her fallen fiancé, to tell his story. And if, in the course of telling that story, she happens to mention other stories about soldiers who did the right thing and were punished for it, well, that's her prerogative as a decorated veteran. That's suicide, Victor said. Hoffman will destroy her. His father will use every connection they have. They'll try, Mackenzie agreed. But here's the thing about public ceremonies with media present and hundreds of witnesses. Once something's said, it can't be unsaid. Once the truth is out there, it takes on a life of its own. And I'll be there with documentation, with testimony, with everything we need to back up every word she says. Rebecca looked at the invitation to the ceremony, at Michael's name printed in formal script, at the date 3 days away. Her hands were shaking. I can't, she whispered. I can't stand up there and accept a medal for letting him die. You didn't let him die. Mackenzie's voice was gentle but firm. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. You saved 12 lives. That's what the medal recognizes. It should have been him standing there. Should have been him coming home. Should have been him growing old and raising kids and living the life we planned. Yes, Mackenzie said simply. It should have been, but it wasn't. And you don't honor his memory by hiding from it. You honor it by standing up, by being the warrior he knew you were, by fighting for the things he believed in. Doc spoke quietly. What did he believe in? Rebecca closed her eyes, saw Michael's face in the darkness behind her eyelids. He believed good people should stand up to bad systems. He believed truth mattered more than convenience. He believed in fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Then do that, Doc said. Stand up. Tell the truth. Fight. She opened her eyes and looked at Victor. If I do this, if I go to Fort Bliss and call out Hoffman publicly, it puts a target on all of us. They'll come after you harder. Investigate the Brotherhood. Look for any excuse to make your lives harder. You sure you want that? Victor's smile was bitter. They're already doing that. Have been for 10 years. At least this way we'll know we earned it. All right then. Rebecca stood, walked to her bedroom, and pulled a box from the top shelf of her closet. She hadn't opened it in 11 years. Dust had settled thick on the cardboard. She brought it back to the living room and set it on the table. Inside, carefully folded, was her Army service uniform, the one she'd worn to Michael's funeral, the one she'd sworn she'd never wear again. Also in the box, her Navy Cross, still in its presentation case, her silver stars, her ribbons and medals, and all the physical evidence that Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Coleman had existed, had mattered, had served. She lifted out the uniform jacket, felt the weight of it, the way it had been tailored to her frame before grief and whiskey had added 40 pounds. It wouldn't fit now, but that wasn't the point. I'll need 3 days to get this altered, she said, and I'll need to practice what I'm going to say. I can't just wing this. It has to be precise, powerful, true. Mackenzie smiled. I'll help you write it. Between my experience and your story, We'll craft something Hoffman can't dismiss. What about me? Victor asked. What's my role in this? You'll be there, Rebecca said, in the audience. When I tell your story, when I name what happened to you, you'll stand up. Let them see you. Let them put a face to the injustice. Let Dylan see if he's watching online. Victor's breath caught. You think he'll watch? These ceremonies get it streamed, Mackenzie said. Posted on Army websites, social media. If your son's paying any attention to news about his father, he'll see it. And he'll see you standing up for what's right. See you being honored instead of hidden. For the first time since Rebecca had met him, Victor Donovan looked like he believed hope might be possible. They worked through the evening, drafting and redrafting the speech Rebecca would give. Mackenzie's experience with military protocol guided the structure. Rebecca's raw honesty provided the content. Doc contributed tactical suggestions about how to frame things for maximum impact. Victor sat quietly, listening, occasionally offering details about his own court-martial that filled in crucial gaps. As midnight approached, they had something. Not perfect, but powerful. A 4-minute speech that would honor Michael Torres, expose Bradley Hoffman, and demand accountability from a system that had failed too many good soldiers. Rebecca read it through one more time, feeling the weight of each word. This could end my career, Mackenzie said quietly. What's left of it? The Army might strip my pension for speaking out against a serving officer. They won't, Rebecca said. You're too connected, too respected, and you're not saying anything that isn't documented fact. Still a risk. Everything worth doing is a risk. She looked at him directly. Why are you really doing this, sir? The truth. Mackenzie was quiet for a long moment. My son was Army. Captain. Good officer. Died in Iraq in '07. IED during patrol. His commanding officer had ignored intelligence reports about that road being heavily mined. Wanted to stick to the scheduled route instead of adapting to new information. 4 men died because of that decision. His voice stayed level, but his eyes were distant. The officer got a letter of reprimand, filed away. Didn't stop his career. He's a colonel now. My son is in Arlington Cemetery, Section 60, Grave 412. Mackenzie looked at Rebecca. So when you ask why I'm doing this, it's because I couldn't do anything for my son. But maybe I can do something for yours, Victor. And for all the others who've been failed by officers more worried about their careers than their soldiers' lives. The room held a different kind of silence now. The silence of shared grief finding common cause. We're going to Fort Bliss, Rebecca said. We're going to tell the truth. And whatever happens after, we'll face it together. Together, Victor echoed. Doc raised his coffee cup. To truth and consequences. They touched cups, coffee and whiskey mixing, an oath sealed between warriors who'd found each other in the wreckage of systems that had broken them. 3 days. That's all they had to prepare. To get ready for a confrontation that could end careers, destroy reputations, and possibly accomplish nothing at all. But 3 days was enough time to alter a uniform, enough time to memorize a speech, enough time to gather courage from the knowledge that they were finally, after all these years, doing something instead of enduring. Rebecca stood at her window after the others had left, looking out at the Santa Fe night. The Brotherhood was camped at the motel, 12 bikes lined up like soldiers at attention. Mackenzie was in a hotel downtown, probably still making calls, pulling strings, preparing for the battle ahead. And somewhere in Colorado, a 14-year-old boy named Dylan was going to sleep, not knowing that in 3 days his father would stand up in front of hundreds of people and demand the respect that had been stolen from him. Rebecca touched the window glass, felt the cool against her palm, thought about Michael Torres and the ranch in Montana they'd never bought, thought about the children they'd never had, thought about all the futures that had died on that mountainside. Then she thought about the future that was still possible, the one where truth mattered, where good soldiers weren't punished for courage, where fathers and sons could reconcile, where ghosts could finally rest. It was a long shot, maybe impossible, but she'd made impossible shots before. In 3 days, she'd make another one. Not with a rifle this time, with words, with truth, with the weight of 11 years of silence finally breaking into sound. Fort Bliss waited. Bradley Hoffman waited. The reckoning waited. And Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Coleman, sniper, ghost, keeper of promises to dead men, was ready to stop hiding and start fighting. The stars wheeled overhead. The desert breathed its ancient rhythm. And somewhere in the distance, thunder promised rain that might never come. But promise was enough. For now, promise was enough. The drive to Fort Bliss took 4 hours through high desert that seemed to stretch forever. Empty, and ancient and indifferent to human drama. Rebecca rode in Colonel Mackenzie's rental car, her altered uniform hanging in the back seat, pressed and perfect. In her lap sat the presentation case containing Michael Torres's Distinguished Service Medal, delivered by courier 2 days ago with a note about how honored the Army was to finally recognize his sacrifice. She'd opened the case once, looked at the bronze medallion, the red, white, and blue ribbon, the certificate with Michael's name rendered in formal calligraphy. Then she closed it and hadn't opened it again because looking at it made her want to put her fist through a wall. Behind them, the Iron Brotherhood rode in formation, 12 motorcycles keeping precise spacing like an honor guard. Victor at the point, Doc beside him, the others arrayed in 2 columns. They'd cleaned their bikes until chrome gleamed like mirrors. They dug out whatever dress clothes they owned, button-down shirts and sport coats that didn't quite fit anymore, the wardrobes of men who'd once had jobs and futures. They looked like what they were, veterans trying their damnedest to show respect for something bigger than themselves. Mackenzie drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his face carved from granite. He'd barely slept in 3 days, she knew. Had been making calls, gathering documentation, building a case that could survive the storm they were about to unleash. The night before, he'd shown her the file, 40 pages of evidence, court-martial transcripts, after-action reports, testimony from soldiers who'd served under Bradley Hoffman and seen his pattern of self-preservation disguised as tactical decision-making, medical discharge papers for the men who'd tried to speak out and been forced out instead, a comprehensive portrait of systemic corruption that started with one cowardly captain and metastasized into a cover-up that reached the Pentagon. "We're going to end careers today," Mackenzie had said quietly. "Maybe our own. You ready for that?" She hadn't answered because there was no good answer. Ready or not, this was happening. Fort Bliss materialized from the desert heat, sprawling across the Texas landscape like a small city. Guard posts, vehicle checkpoints, miles of fence, the machinery of military might on full display. Rebecca felt something tighten in her chest as they approached the main gate, memories flooding back of other bases, other gates, other times when she'd driven onto installations as Chief Warrant Officer Coleman instead of Becca, the truck driver. Mackenzie presented credentials at the gate. The guard checked his ID, saw the retired rank, snapped a salute sharp enough to cut, waved them through without question. The Iron Brotherhood followed, a civilian escort that drew stares but no challenges. Veterans knew veterans, even the ones on motorcycles. The ceremony was being held at the main parade ground, a vast expanse of manicured grass surrounded by buildings that spoke of military order and purpose. Bleachers had been set up for families and guests, a stage with podium and microphones. Flags snapping in the October breeze. Already 100 people had gathered, soldiers in dress uniform, civilians in their Sunday best, photographers from the base paper setting up equipment. Rebecca parked where Mackenzie indicated, in a lot reserved for VIP guests. She sat in the car for a long moment, hands gripping the wheel, breathing deep and slow like she'd learned in sniper school. Center yourself, control your heart rate, focus on the mission. The mission today wasn't a target at impossible distance. It was truth at point-blank range. She got out of the car, retrieved her uniform from the back seat, and headed toward the building Mackenzie indicated would have changing facilities. Behind her, the Brotherhood was parking their bikes in a neat row, dismounting, stretching road-weary muscles. Victor caught her eye across the parking lot and nodded once. She nodded back. Warriors acknowledging each other before battle. The women's changing room was empty. She hung her uniform on a hook and stared at it for a full minute before beginning to undress. The Class A uniform jacket with its specialist insignia, her ribbons arranged in precise rows, the Night Stalker patch on the shoulder, the trousers with their perfect crease, the low quarter shoes polished to mirror shine. She'd been 40 pounds lighter the last time she wore this. The tailor had done good work letting it out, but it still fit tight across her shoulders and hips, the fabric straining against a body that had spent 11 years trying to disappear into itself. But it fit. That was what mattered. She looked at herself in the mirror, Chief Warrant Officer 3. Rebecca Coleman stared back, 44 years old, carrying ghosts like other people carried wallets. Her ribbons told a story most people couldn't read. Campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, commendations for valor. The Navy Cross a splash of blue among the others. The uniform said warrior. Her eyes said haunted. Good enough. She picked up the presentation case with Michael's medal and walked out into the Texas sun. The parade ground had filled significantly. 300 people now, maybe more. Soldiers standing in formation. Officers gathered near the stage. Families claiming seats in the bleachers. News cameras from local stations. This wasn't just a base ceremony anymore. This was an event. Mackenzie appeared at her elbow, himself in full-dress uniform, his chest a testament to 35 years of service. Media's here. Good. The more witnesses, the better. He gestured toward the bleachers. The Brotherhood's sitting third row. I made sure they got good seats. When the time comes, they'll be visible. Where's Hoffman? Backstage, preparing his speech about honor and sacrifice. Mackenzie's voice dripped acid. He doesn't know you're here. I kept your name off the advance program. Wanted it to be a surprise. He'll recognize me. Not until you're at the podium. By then it'll be too late. Mackenzie touched her arm gently. You remember what we practiced? Every word. Don't overthink it. Just speak from the heart. Tell Michael's story. Tell Victor's story. Tell the truth. That's all you have to do. She wanted to ask what came after. Wanted to know if he really believed this would work. If exposing Hoffman would actually lead to justice or just to more cover-ups and closed doors. But there was no time. A captain was approaching, clipboard in hand, looking for Chief Warrant Officer Coleman to brief her on ceremony protocol. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of instructions and staging. Where to sit, when to stand, how to approach the podium. The captain was young, earnest, probably didn't know anything about the bomb Rebecca was about to detonate in the middle of his carefully planned event. She nodded and smiled and said, yes, sir, and all the while her heart hammered like she was back on that mountainside choosing between love and duty. At 10:00 hours exactly, the ceremony began. The post band played the national anthem. 300 people stood with hands over hearts. The flag snapped in the wind. For a moment, Rebecca let herself remember why she joined in the first place. The belief that service mattered, that protecting people was worth the fight, that America, for all its flaws, was still worth defending. She'd believed that once, wanted to believe it again. The base commander, a 2-star general named Adams, took the podium and spoke about sacrifice and heroism and the debt owed to those who serve. Standard ceremony language, polished and sincere. Then he introduced the day's speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Hoffman, battalion commander, leader of men, decorated officer. Hoffman took the stage to applause. He was smaller than Rebecca expected, maybe 5'10", trim and polished in his dress uniform. 43 years old, but looking younger, the kind of face that smiled easily and meant nothing. His ribbons included a Bronze Star she'd bet money he hadn't earned, an Iraq campaign medal from service safely behind the wire, administrative awards for peacetime excellence. He spoke for 10 minutes about the importance of honoring fallen heroes, about remembering sacrifice, about the bonds between soldiers that transcended death itself. He was a good speaker, she'd given him that, knew how to modulate his voice, when to pause for effect, how to make eye contact with the audience and make them feel included. He was also, she knew from the files Mackenzie had compiled, a coward who'd abandoned men under fire and then destroyed the career of the soldier who'd saved them. The rage in her chest was cold and focused. Sniper calm. She breathed through it. Hoffman finished his speech to applause and stepped aside. General Adams returned to the podium and began presenting awards. A Purple Heart to a sergeant who'd lost his leg in Syria. An Army Commendation Medal to a specialist who'd performed exceptionally during humanitarian relief. Each recipient stood, accepted their award, shook hands, returned to their seat. Clean, simple, procedural. Then Adams called her name. Chief Warrant Officer 3 Rebecca Coleman, to accept the Distinguished Service Medal being awarded posthumously to Sergeant First Class Michael Torres. Rebecca stood. The world narrowed to the space between her seat and the podium, every step measured and deliberate. She was aware of eyes on her, hundreds of them, assessing this woman in a uniform that fit too tight, this ghost emerging from 11 years of silence. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage, crossed to the podium, accepted the medal case from General Adams with hands that didn't shake, shook his hand, heard him say thank you for his service in the same tone he'd used for everyone else. Then she turned to face the microphone, and 300 people went silent, waiting for her to say thank you and step down so the ceremony could continue. She didn't step down. She set the metal case on the podium and looked out at the assembled crowd. Saw the Iron Brotherhood in the third row, 12 men sitting at attention. Saw Victor Donovan, his face tight with anticipation and fear. Saw Doc Hayes beside him, steady as a rock. Saw Mackenzie standing at the side of the stage, a file folder in his hands. Ready. She saw Hoffman off to her left, standing with other officers, his expression starting to shift from polite attention to confusion as she failed to follow protocol. She took a breath and began to speak. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres died on a mountain in Afghanistan 11 years ago. He was 29 years old. We were supposed to be married when we got home. Her voice carried across the parade ground, amplified by the microphone, steady and clear. He died because I made a choice. 12 Navy SEALs were pinned down in a valley under heavy fire. Michael was hit by shrapnel from an IED. He was bleeding out 20 meters from my position. I had to choose, go to him and let the SEALs die, or stay on my rifle and save them. She paused. Let that sink in. I chose the mission. I fired 47 rounds in 6 minutes. 9 confirmed kills at distances ranging from 800 to 1,340 yards. The SEALs walked out of that valley. Every single one. Michael Torres bled to death waiting for me to come to him. In the bleachers, people had gone completely still. This wasn't standard ceremony language. This was raw and real and uncomfortable. The Navy Cross I received for that action, I accepted at his funeral. I stood next to his mother while they lowered his casket into the ground, and they pinned a medal on my chest for letting her son die. That's what we do in the military. We turn impossible choices into commendations. We make heroes out of people who are just trying to survive decisions that shouldn't have to be made. Hoffman was moving now. She could see him in her peripheral vision, stepping toward the podium. General Adams raised a hand, stopping him, wanting to hear where this was going. But here's what we don't do. We don't honor the soldiers who make the right choice when it costs them everything. We don't protect the men and women who stand up and do what's necessary, even when it means disobeying orders that are wrong. She looked directly at Hoffman now. His face had gone pale. In August 2013, in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, a Marine captain named Bradley Hoffman ordered his unit to retreat from a compound where 4 Army Rangers were pinned down by enemy fire. Master Sergeant Victor Donovan, 75th Ranger Regiment, protested that order, said it would mean leaving brothers to die. Captain Hoffman made it a direct order. Retreat. Abandon them. Save yourselves. The parade ground was silent except for wind and the flags. Master Sergeant Donovan disobeyed that order. He took 6 volunteers and went back. 2 Rangers died before he reached them. PFC Jason Miller, 20 years old. Sergeant Luis Ramirez, 28 years old, father of 2. 2 Rangers survived because Victor Donovan chose brothers over orders. Specialist Marcus Hayes and Corporal Tommy Martinez owe their lives to a man who was willing to be court-martialed rather than abandon them. She gestured toward the bleachers. Victor Donovan is here today. 3rd row. Victor stood. 300 heads turned to look at him. He stood at attention, a big man in an ill-fitting sport coat, a decade of shame and anger carved into his face. The Army court marshaled Sergeant Donovan for insubordination and reckless endangerment, gave him a dishonorable discharge, took his rank, his pension, his honor. Meanwhile, Captain Bradley Hoffman, who gave the order to abandon those Rangers, was promoted to Major within 18 months. He's here today too. Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman, the man who just spoke to you about sacrifice and honor. Hoffman was frozen, his face cycling through shock and rage and calculation. General Adams was staring at Rebecca with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'm not here to destroy Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman's career, Rebecca continued. I'm here because I couldn't save Michael Torres, and I've spent 11 years trying to live with that. Because I made the right tactical choice, and it killed the man I loved. Because the system that gave me a medal for that is the same system that destroyed Victor Donovan for doing exactly what I did, choosing the mission over the easy way out. Colonel Mackenzie was moving now, walking onto the stage with his file folder. He handed it to General Adams, who opened it and began reading. In that folder, Rebecca said, is documentation of Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman's pattern of behavior. 3 other incidents where he prioritized his safety over his soldiers' lives. 3 other soldiers who tried to report his conduct and were silenced or forced out. Court-martial transcripts that were sealed by order of General Richard Hoffman, Bradley Hoffman's father, to protect his son's career. She gripped the edges of the podium, felt the metal solid under her hands. Michael Torres died doing his job. Jason Miller and Luis Ramirez died because an officer failed to do his. And Victor Donovan has spent 10 years being treated like a criminal because he refused to let 2 more men die for the same reason. That's not justice. That's not honor. That's corruption. And I won't stand here and accept a medal for sacrifice while the man who embodies actual sacrifice is sitting in the audience stripped of everything he earned. General Adams looked up from the folder, looked at Hoffman, looked at Rebecca. His face was stone. Chief Coleman, these are serious allegations. Yes, sir. That's why I brought documentation. That's why Colonel Mackenzie spent 3 days compiling evidence. That's why we're doing this publicly, in front of witnesses and cameras, so it can't be buried again. Hoffman found his voice finally, stepping forward. This is slander. This woman is clearly disturbed. She's using this ceremony to settle some personal grudge. I've never met you before today, Rebecca said calmly. But I know men like you, men who send others to decay and call it leadership. Men who use their father's influence to escape consequences. Men who wear uniforms they haven't earned and medals they don't deserve. How dare you? Hoffman's voice shook with fury. I have served this country for 20 years. You've worn the uniform for 20 years. There's a difference. Mackenzie spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command. General Adams, in that folder is testimony from Staff Sergeant Tommy Martinez, currently serving at Fort Campbell. He's willing to go on record about what happened in Kunar province. He's willing to testify that Captain Hoffman gave the abandon order and that Master Sergeant Donovan saved his life. Adams closed the folder, looked at Hoffman. Colonel, step down from the stage. Now. Sir, I can explain. I said step down. That's an order. Hoffman's face went through several colors. Then he turned and walked off the stage, his back rigid, his hands clenched into fists. The parade ground was chaos now. Officers conferring in tight groups, soldiers whispering, cameras recording everything. Rebecca stood at the podium, her heart hammering, waiting to see if this had been suicide or salvation. General Adams stepped to the microphone. This ceremony is concluded. All personnel are dismissed except Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman, who will report to my office immediately. Colonel Mackenzie, Chief Coleman, you'll accompany us. He turned to the formation of soldiers. What you've witnessed here today is the difficult process of accountability. The United States Army does not tolerate cowardice. We do not protect officers who fail their soldiers, and we do not punish good men for doing the right thing. Master Sergeant Donovan, front and center. Victor stood frozen in the bleachers. Doc had to physically push him to get him moving. He walked down to the parade ground like a man in a dream, climbed the stairs to the stage, crossed to where General Adams stood. Adams extended his hand. The Army failed you, Sergeant. We're going to make that right. Victor's knees buckled. Doc was there instantly, steadying him. The big man was crying, shoulders shaking, a decade of pressure releasing all at once. Rebecca stepped back from the podium, her part done, and found herself surrounded by officers with questions, reporters with cameras, soldiers wanting to shake her hand. She pushed through them, heading for the stairs, needing air, needing space, needing to process what had just happened. Mackenzie caught her at the bottom of the stage. You did it. You actually did it. Did I, or did I just make everything worse? Adams is a good man, fair. He'll investigate. And with the media here, with cameras recording, they can't bury this. Mackenzie gripped her shoulders. Becca, you just changed the game. For Victor, for every soldier who's ever been railroaded by corrupt officers. You spoke truth to power, and power blinked. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that her speech would lead to justice instead of just more pain. But she'd been in the military long enough to know that truth didn't always win. Sometimes truth just got you noticed by people who preferred comfortable lies. The Iron Brotherhood surrounded them, forming a protective circle. Doc was with Victor, holding him up while he cried. The other bikers stood guard, watching the crowd, making sure no one approached who shouldn't. A young sergeant pushed through. Ma'am, General Adams wants you in his office in 15 minutes. Rebecca nodded, looking at Mackenzie. What do I say? The truth, same as you just did. He'll ask for details. You provide them. He'll ask if you have proof. We have the folder. Mackenzie's smile was thin. And he'll ask if you're willing to testify at an official investigation. You say yes. And if Hoffman's father intervenes? General Richard Hoffman retired 3 years ago. He's got connections but no active authority, And this is too public now. Too many witnesses. The Army will have to investigate properly or lose all credibility. 15 minutes later, Rebecca sat in General Adams's office, Victor and Mackenzie beside her, Hoffman conspicuously absent. Adams sat behind his desk, the folder open in front of him, reading with the careful attention of someone who knew he was holding a bomb. Finally, he looked up. "Chief Coleman, do you understand what you've done here today?" "Yes, sir." "You've accused a serving officer of cowardice and corruption in front of 300 witnesses and multiple news cameras. You've put the Army in a position where we have to investigate or look like we're covering up wrongdoing. You've potentially destroyed a man's career and reputation. Sir, his career should have been destroyed 13 years ago when he abandoned 4 Rangers." Adams was quiet for a moment. "Colonel Mackenzie, is the testimony in this folder reliable?" "Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Martinez is willing to testify under oath. So is Specialist Hayes here. And I have 3 other former soldiers willing to speak about separate incidents involving Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman's decision-making under pressure." "And the court-martial records?" "Sealed by order of General Hoffman in 2014. But I have copies from sources within JAG who felt the sealing was improper." Adams closed the folder, sat back in his chair, looked at each of them in turn. "I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't. I'm going to tell you what happens next." He stood, walked to his window, looked out at the parade ground being dismantled. "I'm going to request a full JAG investigation into the events of August 2013 in Kunar Province. I'm going to request that Master Sergeant Donovan's court-martial be reviewed for possible overturn. I'm going to suspend Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman pending the outcome of that investigation. And I'm going to make damn sure that every bit of this is documented in public so nobody can make it disappear." He turned back to face them. "I'm also going to ask you, Chief Coleman, if you're prepared for what comes next, the media attention, the scrutiny, the fact that you'll be a very public face of military whistleblowing and reform. Your life as a private citizen is over. You understand that?" Rebecca thought about her small apartment in Santa Fe, her truck, her quiet, invisible life. Thought about 11 years of hiding and what it had cost her. "My private life ended 11 years ago when I chose to let Michael Torres die. I've just been pretending it hadn't." She met Adams' eyes. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, sir." Adams nodded, looked at Victor. "Sergeant Donovan, you have a son, Dylan, 14 years old, lives in Colorado." Victor's head came up. "How do you know that?" "Because I looked you up the second Chief Coleman said your name. Wanted to know who I was dealing with." Adams pulled out his phone, scrolled, turned the screen around. It was a news article posted 20 minutes ago. "Disgraced veteran revealed as hero at Fort Bliss ceremony." Below it, thousands of comments, shares, reactions. "Your son's getting to see this," Adams said quietly. "He's going to see his father stand up and be recognized. He's going to learn the truth. Whether you're ready for that or not." Victor's hands were shaking. "I don't know what to say to him. Say you love him. Say you're sorry you weren't there. Say you tried your best." Adams' voice softened. "Say you're human and you failed, but you never stopped fighting to make it right. That's all any father can do." The office was quiet except for the sound of Victor crying again, softer this time. The tears of a man who'd been holding everything in for so long, he'd forgotten how to let it out. Rebecca stood. "Sir, with your permission, we'll leave you to your investigation. We've done what we came to do." "You've done more than that, Chief. You've reminded me why I put this uniform on 40 years ago." Adams came around his desk, stood at attention, and saluted her. She returned the salute, crisp and military, feeling the weight of it settle into her bones. They walked out of the headquarters building into afternoon sun that felt different somehow. Cleaner. Brighter. The Iron Brotherhood was waiting in the parking lot, bikes gleaming, men standing ready. News vans were pulling up, reporters with cameras. This was going to be a circus. But for the first time in 11 years, Rebecca didn't feel like running from it. Victor stopped beside his motorcycle, turned to face her. "I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by calling your son. Thank me by being the father he deserves. Thank me by never using Danny Chen's name again unless you're honoring his memory properly." "I won't. I promise." Victor extended his hand. "Whatever happens next, you've got the Brotherhood behind you. All of us. For life." She shook his hand, felt the strength in his grip, the warrior's bond forming. "I'll hold you to that." Mackenzie approached, his uniform jacket slung over one shoulder, looking older and more tired than she'd ever seen him. "I need a drink. Maybe 10 drinks. Anyone interested?" Doc laughed. "There's a bar 3 miles from here called The Last Stand. Veteran-owned. They'll understand what just happened. Then that's where we're going. Mackenzie looked at Rebecca. You coming? She thought about the questions she'd have to answer, the interview she'd have to give, the fact that her face would be all over the news by evening. Chief Warrant Officer Coleman emerging from obscurity to accuse a sitting officer of cowardice. She thought about Michael Torres and the promise she'd made to fight for something worth fighting for. Yeah, she said, I'm coming. They mounted their bikes and their cars and headed away from Fort Bliss, away from the ceremony and the confrontation and the moment that had changed everything. Behind them, the machinery of military justice began to turn. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain and dangerous, and finally, after 11 years, worth facing. Rebecca rode with the window down, wind in her face, the sun warm on her arm. For the first time since Helmand Province, she felt like she could breathe. The last stand was exactly what its name promised. A weathered building on the edge of El Paso, where veterans went when they needed to be around people who understood without explanations. The walls were covered in unit patches and faded photographs, the kind of place where silence was respected and stories were shared only when ready. The bartender was a former Marine gunnery sergeant with one arm and eyes that had seen Fallujah. He took one look at the group walking through his door and started pouring whiskey. Rebecca sat in a corner booth with Mackenzie and Victor, Doc beside them, the rest of the Brotherhood scattered around nearby tables forming a protective perimeter without being asked. Her phone had been ringing nonstop since they left Fort Bliss. News organizations, military reporters, veterans advocacy groups. She turned it off after the 15th call and hadn't turned it back on. The television above the bar was tuned to CNN. Her face filled the screen, a screenshot from someone's phone recording of the ceremony. The chyron read, "Decorated sniper exposes military cover-up at Fort Bliss." The sound was muted, but she could see her own lips moving, delivering the speech that had detonated like a bomb in the middle of that parade ground. Mackenzie followed her gaze. "You're national news. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. Cable news, social media, probably international press by tomorrow." "I don't want to be famous," she said quietly. "I just wanted to tell the truth. Sometimes truth makes you famous whether you want it or not." He raised his glass. To uncomfortable truths and the people brave enough to speak them. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, familiar and grounding. Rebecca felt the adrenaline of the last 6 hours starting to crash, exhaustion creeping in at the edges. She'd been running on fury and purpose since Santa Fe. Now that the confrontation was over, she felt hollowed out, empty. Victor sat across from her, staring at his own phone like it might bite him. He turned it on once, seen 47 missed calls and 200 messages, and immediately powered it back off. But one message had gotten through before he did, from his ex-wife. "Dylan saw, he wants to talk to you." 4 words that had broken something in Victor's chest. He'd shown the message to Rebecca with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. She'd gripped his shoulder and said nothing because there were no words adequate for that moment. "You should call him," Doc said gently, "before he loses his nerve." Victor looked up, his face ravaged by hope and terror in equal measure. "What do I say? How do I explain 10 years of nothing?" "You don't explain. You apologize. You tell him you love him. You ask for a chance." Doc's voice carried the weight of someone who'd had similar conversations, made similar amends. "And you accept whatever he gives you, even if it's not forgiveness, even if it's just 5 minutes on the phone." Victor stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "I need air. I need to think." He walked out of the bar into the late afternoon sun. Through the window, Rebecca watched him pace the parking lot, phone in hand, working up the courage to make the call that might save him or destroy him completely. Mackenzie signaled the bartender for another round. "That boy's about to have the most important conversation of his life. We should give him privacy." "He shouldn't be alone," Rebecca said. "He's not. He's got a son on the other end of that line. That's not alone." They sat in silence, drinking slowly, watching the news cycle through its endless loop. Other stories appeared and faded. Political scandals, national tensions, sports scores. But every 15 minutes, Rebecca's face came back. The story was too good, too dramatic, too perfectly aligned with the national conversation about military accountability and whistleblower protection. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She turned it back on without quite meaning to. A text from Sheriff Tom Brennan. "Saw the news. You did good. Real good. Michael would be proud. She stared at the message, feeling something crack in her chest. Would Michael be proud? Or would he be angry that she'd taken 11 years to start fighting again? Would he understand why she'd hidden? Or would he see it as the cowardice it was? Another text came through, this one from a number she didn't recognize. Chief Coleman, this is Staff Sergeant Tommy Martinez. I heard what you did at Fort Bliss. I'm on my way there now to give my testimony. Thank you for having the courage I didn't. You saved my life twice now. Then another from a military email address. CW3, Coleman, Lieutenant General Patricia Morrison here, Army, JAG. I'll be leading the investigation into the Donovan court-martial and the Hoffman allegations. Your testimony will be crucial. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. And Chief, thank you for your service then and your courage now. The messages kept coming. Veterans she'd never met thanking her. Soldiers sharing their own stories of being failed by the system. News producers begging for interviews. A literary agent asking if she'd considered writing a book. She turned the phone off again. This was too fast. She'd expected consequences, but not this flood of attention and expectation. Outside, Victor was on his phone now. She could see his lips moving, his free hand gesturing. The call was happening. Father and son, separated by a decade of pain, connected by a wire and courage and the truth that had finally been spoken. Doc stood. I'm going to check on him, make sure he doesn't fall apart. He's stronger than you think, Rebecca said. I know, but sometimes strong men need someone to hold them up when they finally let themselves feel everything they've been holding back. He walked out, leaving Rebecca and Mackenzie alone in the booth. The colonel poured them both another measure of whiskey from the bottle the bartender had left on their table. You know what happens next, don't you, Mackenzie said. Investigation, testimony, probably a circus. Yes, but after that, after the JAG investigation concludes and Hoffman is held accountable and Victor's discharge is overturned. After the news cycle moves on to the next scandal, what happens to you? Rebecca had been avoiding that question. I go back to Santa Fe, back to my truck, back to my life. No, you don't. That life is gone. You can't disappear again after this. Mackenzie leaned forward. The Army is going to want you back. Not active duty, you're past that, but as an instructor, a consultant, someone who can teach the next generation not just how to shoot, but why it matters, how to make impossible choices with honor. I don't want that. What do you want? She thought about that. What did she want? For 11 years, she'd wanted to disappear, to stop hurting, to forget. None of that had worked. The pain had just gone underground, festering, turning her into a ghost of herself. I want Michael's death to mean something, she said finally. I want every impossible choice I made to add up to more than just surviving. I want the kids who died under my protection to be remembered for who they were, not just as numbers in after-action reports. Then help me, Mackenzie said. I'm putting together a foundation. Veterans advocacy, helping soldiers who've been failed by the system. Legal representation for wrongful discharges. Mental health support for combat trauma. I've got funding. I've got connections. What I need is a face. Someone people trust. Someone who's lived it. You want me to be a spokesperson. I want you to be a warrior in a different kind of fight. The one that happens after the shooting stops. The one where we take care of our own because the government won't. Rebecca drank her whiskey and thought about that. Thought about all the soldiers like Victor, discarded and destroyed. All the veterans like herself carrying ghosts and guilt. All the families like Michael's mother, left with flags and medals and empty chairs at Thanksgiving. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I ask. Outside, Victor had ended his call. He stood in the parking lot with his head bowed, Doc's hand on his shoulder. Rebecca couldn't tell from this distance if he was crying from grief or joy. Maybe both. Maybe that's what healing looked like. The door opened and Victor came back inside, moving like a man who just survived something that should have killed him. His eyes were red but clear. He slid into the booth and drained his whiskey in one swallow. I talked to Dylan, he said, his voice rough, for 23 minutes. First time in 10 years. How was it? Rebecca asked. Hard. He's angry, hurt. He said things I deserved to hear. Called me a coward for abandoning him. Asked me why I never fought harder to stay in his life. Victor's hands shook as he poured another drink. But he also said he saw the video. Said he watched me stand up in that ceremony. Said for the first time he could see why I did what I did. That's something, Doc said. It's everything. Victor's voice cracked. He asked if he could come visit me next month. Said he wants to hear my side of the story. Said he wants to try. Tears streamed down his face, but he was smiling. The kind of broken, joyful smile that only comes when something you'd given up hoping for suddenly becomes possible. He's giving me a chance. After everything, after 10 years, he's giving me a chance. Rebecca reached across the table and gripped his hand. Don't waste it. I won't. I swear to God I won't. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, three warriors in a brotherhood, bound by truth told and battles fought, in the fragile hope that maybe, possibly, the system could be changed, and the fallen could be honored, and the broken could be made whole. The next morning, Rebecca stood in General Adams's office at Fort Bliss, Mackenzie beside her, giving formal testimony for the JAG investigation. Lieutenant General Morrison was there via video conference, her face stern but fair, asking questions with surgical precision. The testimony took 4 hours. Rebecca detailed everything she knew about Victor's case, about Hoffman's pattern of behavior, about the culture of protecting favored officers at the expense of good soldiers. Mackenzie provided documentation for every claim. Staff Sergeant Martinez testified remotely from Fort Campbell, his voice steady as he described the abandonment order and Donovan's rescue. By the time they finished, Morrison's expression had shifted from professional skepticism to cold fury. This is worse than I thought, she said. We're not just looking at one bad court-martial. We're looking at systemic corruption that enabled and protected an officer who repeatedly endangered his men. I'm expanding this investigation to include General Richard Hoffman's actions in sealing records and influencing the court-martial process. General Adams spoke up. Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman has been suspended pending investigation. He's retained civilian counsel and is refusing to cooperate. Doesn't matter. We have enough testimony and documentation to proceed without him. Morrison looked directly at Rebecca through the screen. Chief Coleman, I'm going to be direct. This investigation is going to take months. You'll be called to testify multiple times. The media attention will be intense. Hoffman's lawyers will try to discredit you. They'll dig into your past, your PTSD, your drinking, anything they can use to paint you as unreliable. Are you prepared for that? Rebecca thought about 11 years of hiding, thought about the promise she'd made to fight for something worth fighting for. Yes, ma'am, I'm prepared. Good. Because we need you, not just for Donovan's case, but as a witness to how the system fails soldiers. Your story matters. Your credibility matters. Morrison paused. And Chief, for what it's worth, what you did yesterday took more courage than most people will ever understand. You've reminded this old lawyer why I put on the uniform in the first place. The investigation proceeded with grinding military efficiency. Depositions, document reviews, interviews with everyone who'd served with Hoffman over 20 years. The news cycle fed on it, new revelations emerging weekly. 3 more soldiers came forward with stories of Hoffman's cowardice. An anonymous officer leaked emails showing General Richard Hoffman had personally intervened to seal the court-martial records. 6 weeks after the ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Hoffman was formally charged with conduct unbecoming an officer, dereliction of duty, and making false official statements. He resigned his commission rather than face court-martial, forfeiting his pension. The resignation was accepted with general discharge under honorable conditions, the military's way of letting him escape without admitting the full scope of his failures. It wasn't justice, but it was accountability. And in a system that rarely provided either, Rebecca learned to accept the difference. Victor's court-martial was overturned 8 weeks after Fort Bliss. The dishonorable discharge was changed to honorable. His rank was restored retroactively. The Army cut him a check for 10 years of back pay, $287,000 that represented everything he'd lost. He donated it all to the families of Jason Miller and Luis Ramirez, the Rangers who died before he could reach them. Kept nothing for himself except the certificate restoring his rank and the letter from the Army Secretary apologizing for the injustice done to him. 3 months after the ceremony, on a cold January morning, Victor Donovan stood in a cemetery in Colorado Springs holding his son's hand. They were visiting the grave of Victor's father, Dylan's grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who died while Victor was in Afghanistan. Dylan had never met his grandfather. Victor had been too ashamed to bring his son around family after the discharge. But now they stood together, father and son, And Victor told stories about the old man who taught him what it meant to be a soldier. Dylan listened and asked questions and slowly, carefully began to understand that his father was more than the label that had defined him for a decade. After the cemetery, they went to lunch, talked about school and friends and the future. Dylan asked if he could spend spring break with Victor, asked if Victor would teach him to ride a motorcycle, asked if it was okay to be proud of his father again. Victor said yes to all of it, his voice breaking, and Dylan reached across the table and gripped his hand and said, "I'm sorry I didn't believe in you." "You didn't have any reason to," Victor said. "I'm just grateful you're giving me the chance to earn it back." They were building something, not fixing what was broken because some things stay broken, but building something new from the pieces. It was slow and hard, and neither of them really knew what they were doing, but they were trying, and trying was enough. Rebecca spent those same 3 months giving testimony, doing interviews, and slowly, painfully, learning to live in public again. The media attention was relentless. Every major news organization wanted her story. Book publishers offered advances. Documentary filmmakers wanted to follow her around. She said no to most of it, but she said yes to Mackenzie's foundation. The Warriors Accountability Project, they called it, legal defense for wrongfully discharged veterans, mental health support for combat PTSD, advocacy for military justice reform. She became the public face of it, giving speeches at veterans organizations and military bases, telling her story over and over until it stopped hurting quite so much. Every time she spoke Michael Torres' name in front of an audience, it felt like keeping him alive a little longer. Every veteran who came up to her after and said, "Thank you for speaking truth," made the exposure feel worth it. She moved out of her apartment in Santa Fe, took a position at Fort Benning teaching advanced marksmanship, not to active duty soldiers, but to instructors who would teach the next generation. She was good at it, discovered she liked teaching, liked passing on the skills that had kept her alive, and the wisdom that had nearly killed her. Her students were mostly young, fresh-faced kids who thought war was about heroics and medals. She taught them different, taught them that war was about impossible choices and living with consequences, taught them that the hardest shot they'd ever take might be the one they chose not to take, taught them that coming home was harder than going over, and that honor meant standing up for truth even when it cost everything. She didn't drink anymore, didn't need to. The nightmares still came, but they were different now. Less about guilt and more about memory. Michael Torres still appeared in her dreams, but instead of dying, he stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, telling her she'd done good, telling her to keep fighting. She believed him now, most days. 6 months after Fort Bliss, on a warm spring evening, Rebecca stood at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 60, Grave 812. Michael Torres's headstone was simple white marble, his name and rank and dates carved clean. A small flag fluttered beside it. Someone, probably his mother, had left fresh flowers. Rebecca knelt in the grass and set her own offering beside them. Not flowers, the Navy Cross she'd received for the mission that killed him. She'd carried it for 11 years, unable to look at it, unable to let it go. Now she placed it against his headstone and felt something release in her chest. "I kept my promise," she said quietly. "I found something worth fighting for. I stood up. I told the truth. I tried to make it count for something." The evening breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves and flags. Around her, row upon row of white headstones stretched into the distance, each one representing a life given, a sacrifice made, a family left behind. "I'm going to keep fighting," she continued, "going to keep telling your story, going to keep making sure people remember what you gave and why it mattered. That's what I can do. That's all I can do." She stood, brushed grass from her knees, and turned to find Colonel Mackenzie standing a respectful distance away. He'd aged in the last 6 months, the stress of the foundation and the investigation taking their toll. But his eyes were clear and his spine was straight, and he looked like a man who'd found his purpose again. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. "You ready for tomorrow?" Tomorrow was the congressional hearing. The Senate Armed Services Committee had called her to testify about military justice reform and whistleblower protection. It would be televised, watched by millions, her face and story broadcast into every home in America. "No," she said honestly, "but I'll do it anyway. That's all courage is, doing what needs doing even when you're terrified." Mackenzie gestured at the endless rows of graves. "They didn't die so we could have a perfect system. They died believing we'd keep trying to make it better. That's the contract. We keep trying. They walked together through Arlington as the sun set, painting the sky orange and purple and gold. At the main gate, the Iron Brotherhood was waiting. Victor had ridden down from Colorado with Dylan on the back of his bike, the boys' first long-distance ride. Doc was there with half a dozen other members. They'd come to support Rebecca before her testimony, to stand with her the way she'd stood with them. Victor dismounted and approached, Dylan beside him. The boy was taller than Rebecca had imagined, gangly in that way of 14-year-olds, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. He extended his hand formally. Chief Coleman, my dad wanted me to meet you, said you're the reason we're talking again. She shook his hand. Your dad's the reason. He had the courage to stand up when it mattered. I just helped shine a light on it. He told me what you did, what you sacrificed, what you lost. Dylan's voice was serious, older than his years. I'm going to join the Army when I'm 18. Dad doesn't love it, but he understands. I want to serve like you did, like he did. But I want to serve in an army that's been fixed, that's been made better. That's a good goal, Rebecca said. Help us fix it before you join. How? Tell your story. Tell everyone what it was like to have a father labeled a criminal when he was actually a hero. Tell them what the system took from your family. Young voices matter. People listen to kids in ways they don't listen to old warriors. Dylan considered that, nodded slowly. I can do that. I will do that. Victor gripped his son's shoulder, pride and pain mixing on his face. We're going to the hearing tomorrow. Front row, so you know you're not alone up there. I know, Rebecca said, and she did. She wasn't the lone sniper on the mountain anymore, choosing between love and duty with no backup. She had a brotherhood now, had Mackenzie and Victor and Doc and all the others who'd been broken by the system and refused to stay broken. That night in her hotel room, Rebecca laid out her Class A uniform for the hearing. Pressed and perfect, ribbons in precise rows, the Navy Cross returned to its place of honor on her chest. She'd taken it back from Michael's grave after a long conversation with his mother, who'd said Michael would want her to wear it, would want the world to see what courage actually looked like. She stood in front of the mirror practicing her opening statement, not the words themselves, but the posture, the presence, the authority. She was 44 years old, a combat veteran, a survivor, a truth teller. She would walk into that hearing room and she would speak and they would listen because she'd earned the right to be heard. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sheriff Tom Brennan. The whole department is watching tomorrow. Mojave County's got your back. Then one from Dolores at the diner. Mia, you make us all proud. Kick their asses with truth. Then one from an unknown number that made her breath catch. Chief Coleman, this is Sarah Torres, Michael's mother. I'll be watching tomorrow. My son loved you. He would be so proud of the woman you've become. Fight hard, fight true, and know that you carry his love with you always. Rebecca sat on the edge of her bed and cried, the kind of crying that comes from release rather than pain. 11 years of holding everything in, and now it was pouring out. Grief and relief and gratitude and hope all mixing together until she couldn't separate one from another. When the tears stopped, she felt lighter, cleaner, ready. The hearing room was exactly as intimidating as she'd expected. High ceilings, mahogany panels, senators arrayed behind an elevated bench like judges at a tribunal, cameras everywhere, press corps filling the back rows, C-SPAN broadcasting live. Rebecca sat at the witness table, Mackenzie beside her as counsel, and placed her hands flat on the surface to keep them from shaking. Behind her, the gallery was filled with veterans, the Iron Brotherhood in their cleanest clothes, active duty soldiers who'd requested leave to attend, family members of the wrongfully discharged, the mother of Jason Miller, the ranger who died in Kunar Province, the committee chairman, a senator from Virginia with 30 years in office, and a son serving in the Marines, called the hearing to order. Chief Warrant Officer Coleman, thank you for your willingness to testify today. Your story has captured the nation's attention and raised important questions about military justice and accountability. We're here to listen and to learn. Please tell us in your own words what happened and why reform is necessary. Rebecca leaned toward the microphone, took a breath, and began to speak. She told them about Michael Torres and the impossible choice on that mountain. Told them about 11 years of hiding and guilt and slow death by isolation. Told them about Victor Donovan and the system that punished courage to protect cowardice. told them about every soldier who'd ever been failed by officers more concerned with careers than lives. She spoke for 20 minutes without notes, her voice steady, her eyes meeting each senator in turn. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Senator Virginia stood and began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by the other senators, then the entire gallery rising to their feet in an ovation that lasted 3 minutes. Rebecca sat through it, overwhelmed until she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Victor standing behind her, Dylan beside him, both of them with tears streaming down their faces. "You did it," Victor said. "You really did it." The hearing continued for 6 more hours. Other witnesses testified, experts on military law, veterans advocates, JAG officers. But Rebecca's testimony was what the news would replay. Her face was what would be on front pages. Her words were what would be quoted in editorials calling for reform. That evening, exhausted and wrung out, Rebecca stood on the steps of the Capitol as the sun set over Washington, D.C. Mackenzie was fielding calls from Senate staffers who wanted to draft legislation. Victor was being interviewed by CNN. Doc was organizing the Brotherhood for the drive home. A young Marine private approached her hesitantly in dress blues that looked freshly issued. "Ma'am, I'm shipping out to Okinawa next week. First deployment. I just wanted to say thank you for showing us what right looks like, for teaching us that speaking truth is as important as shooting straight." Rebecca shook his hand. "Keep your head down and your eyes open. Take care of the Marines to your left and right. Come home safe." "I will, ma'am. And if I ever have to make a choice like you did, I'll try to make it with half your courage." He saluted and walked away, and Rebecca watched him go. This kid heading into uncertainty with nothing but his training and his brothers and the hope that the system would support him when he needed it. She couldn't protect him, couldn't guarantee he'd come home, couldn't promise the Army would treat him fairly if something went wrong. But she could fight to make the system better, could keep telling the truth, could keep standing up for the soldiers who couldn't stand up for themselves. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. Michael was still dead. Danny Chen was still dead. Jason Miller and Luis Ramirez were still dead. No amount of testimony or reform would bring them back. But their deaths could mean something, could be the foundation for change, could be the reason the next generation of soldiers got treated with the honor and respect they deserved. That was the promise Rebecca had made to Michael on that mountain, the promise she'd renewed at his grave, the promise she was keeping with every speech and every testimony and every fight. 6 months became a year. The year became 2. The Warriors Accountability Project grew from a small foundation into a national organization. Laws were changed. Court-martial procedures were reformed. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. It wasn't perfect, wasn't enough, but it was progress. Victor Donovan became a public speaker, traveling to military bases and high schools telling his story. Dylan joined him sometimes, the two of them presenting together, father and son united in purpose. The Brotherhood expanded, chapters forming in 20 states, all dedicated to supporting veterans who'd been failed by the system. Colonel Mackenzie won the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his advocacy work, accepted it wearing his full-dress uniform with Rebecca beside him, used his acceptance speech to name every soldier who'd been wrongfully discharged in the last 20 years. A litany of injustice that went on for 12 minutes while the president stood and listened. Rebecca kept teaching at Fort Benning, kept speaking, kept fighting, found a rhythm to her life that felt like purpose instead of just survival. Started dating a widowed VA doctor who understood trauma and didn't expect her to be anything other than who she was. Didn't fix her, just stood beside her while she fixed herself. The nightmares faded but never disappeared entirely. Michael still visited in dreams, but now he was smiling, telling her she'd done good, releasing her from the guilt she'd carried for so long. On the 11th anniversary of his death, Rebecca returned to Arlington, knelt beside his grave, told him about the law that had been passed in his name, the Michael Torres Military Justice Reform Act, requiring independent review of all courts-martial involving senior officer decisions under fire. "We're changing things," she said slowly, "but we're changing them. The next kid who makes the choice I made, the next soldier who stands up like Victor did, they'll have protection I didn't have, support you didn't have. That's your legacy, Michael. Not the death, the change that came after." She stood and turned to find she wasn't alone. A dozen veterans had gathered at a respectful distance, waiting. When she looked at them, they saluted. She returned it, crisp and military, and they approached one by one to shake her hand and tell her their stories and thank her for fighting. This was her life now. This was her mission. Not the precision of a sniper rifle, but the steady pressure of advocacy. Not the instant of a trigger pull, but the long patience of systemic change. It was harder than combat in many ways. Required different courage, different sacrifice. But it was worthy work, important work. The kind of work that honored the dead by protecting the living. As the sun set over Arlington, Rebecca walked among the graves, reading names, remembering faces, carrying the weight of their sacrifice and the responsibility of their legacy. She was no longer hiding, no longer running, no longer the ghost of Chief Warrant Officer Coleman pretending to be someone else. She was exactly who she'd always been. A warrior, a truth teller, a woman who'd made impossible choices and survived to fight another day. The road ahead was long and hard and uncertain, but she didn't have to walk it alone. She had a brotherhood now, had purpose, had Michael's memory and Victor's friendship and Mackenzie's wisdom and the voices of every soldier who'd ever been failed by the system they served. Together, they would keep fighting, keep pushing, keep demanding that honor actually mean something and that sacrifice be recognized and that good soldiers stop being destroyed for doing right. It was the long road home, the journey from that mountain in Afghanistan to the cemetery in Virginia, from silence to voice, from hiding to standing, from death to life. Rebecca Coleman had finally found her way back, not to who she'd been before Michael died. That woman was gone forever, but to who she needed to become, who she'd been called to be. A warrior still, just fighting a different war, one that couldn't be won with bullets and distance, but required the harder courage of speaking truth and refusing to stay silent and standing up every single day to demand better from a system that had taken too much from too many. She touched Michael's headstone one more time, made a silent promise to keep fighting. Then she walked out of Arlington into the gathering dusk, ready for tomorrow's battles, carrying the dead with honor and the living with hope. The stars were coming out, the same stars that had wheeled over Afghanistan and Fort Bliss and every battlefield where good soldiers had fought and died. They looked down on a woman who'd learned that the distance between cowardice and courage was measured not in yards but in choices. And Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Coleman, sniper, teacher, advocate, survivor, chose courage. Every single day, that was enough. That was everything. 3 days researching this story, and Rebecca's choice still haunts me. 11 years she hid. 11 years Victor fought alone. Then one speech changed everything. The father-son reconciliation hit hardest a decade of pain, ending with one phone call. That's the power of truth. What struck you, Rebecca's impossible choice? Victor's fight? Hoffman walking free? Drop your thoughts. I read every comment. Veterans, your stories matter here. This channel honors voices the system tried to silence. Next Friday, the chaplain who carried 47 dog tags. Subscribe so you don't miss it. What should I cover next?